I just don't know how to come to terms with the heartbreak of it.
She remembers thinking they could wait, that if they gave the relationship a little time, if she held off on that one irreversible step, everything would settle and she would feel safer about making such a huge change. But time, it turned out, wasn't a neutral force in their house. It was the countdown on a carefully staged play. Within months of finally doing what Kody wanted, his attentiveness evaporated. The warmth, the promises, the late-night declarations of how indispensable she was, all the things that had felt like lifelines, turned into the faint echo of somebody who just finished a task and no longer needed the tool. It's the grotesque pattern so familiar to anyone who's been love-bombed into compliance. The lover who confesses wild devotion until you hand over what they want, and then, like clockwork, pulls away as if the person you were mattered only insofar as they were useful. Meri did exactly what she hoped would make their bond sturdier, and in doing so she stepped directly into the hole someone else had been digging for her. When you watch the footage with that perspective, the whole sequence starts to look less like two people fumbling through a painful mutual decision and more like an engineered collapse. Kody gives Meri a promise of security, not just words but precisely the legal and social conditions he needs. And almost immediately his investment in her evaporates because his objective has been achieved. He no longer needs to pretend. He no longer needs to court her. That cold calculus of obtaining what benefits you and dropping the performance when the payoff is secured is the anatomy of the con. For viewers, it's infuriating because it reads as cruelty disguised as romance. For Meri, it was devastating because it felt like complicity with her own erasure. What made the scheme so insidious was the way responsibility was rerouted. Instead of owning the push and the pressure, Kody and Robyn deftly rewired the narrative so that Meri would shoulder the blame. It was Meri's idea, they suggested over and over, casually absolving themselves by making her the actor and them the bystanders. This is a manipulator's classic play. Seed an idea and then sit back while the person you want to change believes it bloomed from their own soil. Once she acts on it, they can point and say, "See? She chose this." That inversion is poisonous. It converts sacrifice into guilt and guilt into justification for whatever fallout follows. It's easier, after all, to criticize a choice someone made than to admit you helped steer it. Christine's accusations add another layer, not just that Robyn wanted Meri out, but that Robyn deliberately planted the notion of divorce as a mechanism for a different family architecture. A legal erasure of the first wife so the second wife could step into first wife status and gain power and inheritance. When you listen to Christine describe it, the phrasing, the cadence, the specific examples she uses, it almost sounds like Robyn's own voice echoing back to her. That's the unnerving part. The allegation doesn't come as some abstract theory. It comes as a memory of language, a pattern Christine recognized because she'd heard it before, because Robyn had murmured similar scenarios disguised as what-if conversations. To Christine, it felt less like a casual musing and more like a rehearsal for action. Robyn's denials are quick and performative. The emphatic, "I never said that," delivered with the brittle force of someone who's practiced exculpatory rhetoric. But denials don't erase patterns. You can say you never met anyone who divorced so the second wife could adopt the kids. You can insist you never planted an idea. You can stage astonished outrage at the suggestion. But those words mean very little when your past sentences and insinuations have already been absorbed by the family's rhythm. The con's cleverest trick is not that it forces people to act against their interests, but that it makes them feel as if they acted on their own behalf. When the consequences arrive, the person who performed the act is left holding the blame and the sorrow. There's also the bleak legal reality that hangs over plural marriages of this nature. If you aren't the legal wife, your rights are conditional, fragile, and often invisible until they're needed and missing. The moment you accept that your legal protections are expendable, you open the door to being cut out. Think about it. Possessions, decision-making authority, even guardianship questions can hinge on who holds the official title. For women in these arrangements, the calculus of safety is not merely emotional, it's structural. That's what makes the idea of seizing power not merely rhetorical but existential. If you are not the legal spouse, you have to find ways to ensure you will not be dispossessed, because once you are, reversing it is excruciatingly difficult. So what does seizing power mean in this context? It doesn't have to imply villainy. Often it means insisting on legal protections, preserving income and access, demanding transparency over finances, and refusing to allow critical decisions to be made in private. It means recognizing the vulnerability and responding with concrete defenses rather than sentimental hopes. Meri's experience suggests she tried faith first. Faith that promises would be kept, faith that timing would make things safer. But in a system where power can be reallocated by legal designation, faith is a poor substitute for a will and a plan. The tragedy here is that the emotional pleas and the private compromises are precisely the terrain where manipulative actors operate best. They can call your heart their evidence while their actions rewrite your life. And that is the real cruelty of what played out. It wasn't just a relationship that failed, it was a slow, methodical reassignment of status and security carried out under the guise of domestic conversation. The betrayals didn't happen overnight. They were threaded through casual remarks, suggested improvements, and the soft encouragement of someone who presents her wants as logical solutions. Only when you trace those remarks side by side, Christine's memory, Robyn's suggestions, Kody's withdrawal after his need was met, does the pattern snap into focus. Then it's no longer just gossip or drama. It's a strategy, an orchestration whose victims are left not only heartbroken but legally and socially exposed. Meri never realized that in the game of power and favor inside the Brown family, hesitation was fatal. In theory, the legal wife had the most protection. On paper, she was the one with rights. But rights mean nothing when you're surrounded by whispers, suggestions, and carefully crafted narratives that make your protection look selfish. Robyn never had to say the words directly. She simply sighed over her children, spoke of their absent father, hinted about their fragility and need for security. Suddenly, the burden of guilt shifted. If Meri kept her legal status, she wasn't just keeping a title. She was denying Robyn's kids the safety of adoption, hurting the family, and proving she was as selfish as Kody accused her of being. And that is how a sacrifice became the illusion of virtue. If Meri gave up her legal place, she could save Robyn's children, restore her husband's faith, and finally look like a good sister wife. If she refused, then Kody could point to her as the enemy of peace, the obstacle to harmony, the reason the family was unraveling. Either way, the trap was set, she was doomed to lose. The cruel irony is that this rewriting of history began long before the divorce papers. Meri was led to believe she had introduced Robyn into their circle, that she had brought her husband's future dream girl into the family in some act of misguided generosity. But the truth, later exposed, was that Kody and Robyn had already crossed paths before Meri was even in the picture. What Meri thought was an introduction was really a cover story. She hadn't gifted Kody a new chance at happiness. She had simply uncovered the door to a connection that was already waiting. In her desperate attempt to win Kody's favor, she delivered him directly to the woman who would replace her. By the time the show hit season 8, the Browns weren't the struggling family scraping by on one household anymore. They were wealthy, positioned, and settled into 4 houses in Las Vegas. They had money, influence, and most importantly, assets worth protecting. Suddenly, the role of legal wife wasn't a burden anymore. It was a golden crown. It gave direct access to Kody's wealth, his estate, and his growing empire. Now, Robyn wanted the position she once claimed she didn't need. What looked like a reluctant step into responsibility was, in truth, the prize she'd been circling for years. And Kody? He played his role to perfection. Whenever conflict flared with Meri, he brushed off any blame and instead pointed the finger at her so-called failings with the other wives. He told her she wasn't kind enough, that she was selfish, that she didn't get along. He triangulated them, setting sister against sister, creating fractures where he could insert his own narrative. When Meri begged for his attention, he coldly suggested her misery was her own doing. Meanwhile, Robyn's pain became sacred. Robyn's tears were noble, her sacrifices grand, her struggles heroic. Robyn wasn't the woman threatening Meri's marriage. She was the fragile mother in need of saving. The manipulation reached its peak when Robyn's supposed reluctance began to look like uncanny good fortune. Over and over, she insisted she didn't want certain things, and yet somehow she always ended up with them. She claimed she didn't care for mansions, but she was the only one who secured $1 million home. She said she didn't want Kody, but she became his legal wife and the co-owner of everything built over decades by the original 3. She claimed she was content with a spiritual marriage, but in the end she was the one holding the legal crown, while Meri was cast aside as though she had chosen her own downfall. Every denial worked like camouflage, shielding her from suspicion while she reaped the rewards. And yet the contradictions are staggering. Robyn once declared Kody was her soulmate, the man she wished had fathered her children from the beginning. She said she should have saved her purity for him. How then could she also claim she never wanted to marry him? How could she portray herself as unwilling while simultaneously weaving a story of destiny and lightning bolts from heaven the moment they first locked eyes? Kody himself fueled the myth, telling audiences that God was his wingman, that his union with Robyn was divinely orchestrated. But in the very next breath, he'd pretend he hadn't wanted her, as though fate had dragged them together against their will. It's the performance they perfected. Forever the victims, forever the reluctant beneficiaries. They never wanted the very things they fought hardest to secure. And in the middle of this theater, Meri's sacrifice was twisted into a self-inflicted wound, as if she had engineered her own downfall. Robyn played the martyr. Kody played the passive husband. And together they constructed a narrative where every choice seemed inevitable, every betrayal painted as misfortune, and every step closer to power disguised as suffering. This is the genius of their act. They didn't seize power openly, they disguised it as an accident, a burden, a reluctant inheritance. But if you trace the trail, from Robyn's hints about adoption to Kody's endless triangulation, to Meri's guilt-driven surrender, it becomes painfully clear. None of it was coincidence. It was strategy dressed up as fate. She would sit there, chin lifted just slightly, talking like a hero in her own movie about all the things she was going to do as a single mom. How she would protect her kids, how she would take down her ex, how she would make sure they were safe no matter what. She told it as if it were a noble quest, a court strategy, a crusade. But if you listened closely, you could hear the blueprint of a plan already built. 3 walls, she called them. First, she and Kody had to be legally married. Meri had already taken care of that wall. Second, her ex had to sign away his rights. Third, the judge had to approve Kody. It's almost comical, almost cruel. If Robyn never wanted Meri to divorce Kody and never wanted to marry Kody herself, why were both of those things at the very top of her 3 walls plan? How did 2 supposedly unwanted steps become prerequisites in a master strategy? The lie detector test of life doesn't need wires. The logic exposes itself. Then Kody steps in, his voice smooth and unbothered, as though everything that's happened is just paperwork. He claims Meri came to him, suggested the divorce, suggested the adoption. In his telling, they signed papers, went to dinner, he gave her a ring, and then, in his words, "We probably went home and made love." It's a story designed to sound warm, even romantic, as if nothing was breaking at all. But listen to it closely and it's absurd. If it was only a paperwork shuffle, if it meant nothing, then why wasn't it reversed once the kids were adopted? Why wasn't Robyn divorced and Meri restored to her legal place? Because it wasn't just paper. It was power. It was leverage. It was control. Throughout the show, Kody and Robyn have insisted the legal title means nothing, that the legal stuff doesn't matter. Yet every major shift in this family's history has revolved around who holds that title. The whole earthquake, Meri's divorce, Robyn's ascension, was about giving Kody the ability to adopt Robyn's children. Robyn claims the original wives and their kids bullied her, made her feel like an outsider, tormented her and her children. If that's true, why on earth would she want to give them legal custody, even partial? Because adoption isn't just about protection. It's about rights. It's about money. It's about enforceable obligations. If something happened to Robyn, Kody wouldn't just be the man in her house. He'd be the legal guardian of her children, the one with financial and parental control. And if Robyn and Kody split, she could use those legal ties to secure child support and visitation from him. The more you examine it, the stranger it becomes. If her ex truly had no contact, no support, no visits, why the rush to have Kody adopt? She was acting as if the kids needed saving, but saving them from what? Different last name. A father who was already gone? Her ex may have been a poor father, may have balked at paying medical bills from an accident across state lines, but none of that required erasing him legally. And the double standard is glaring. If no support and no visits are enough to strip a parent's rights, why isn't Christine fighting to strip Kody's? Why isn't David, living in Christine's home with Truly, allowed to adopt her? Because everyone knows that in reality, stripping a biological parent of rights isn't about heroics. It's about power and leverage, and that's exactly what Robyn was securing. Kody, for his part, spoke with fury about his willingness to rain down on Robyn's ex if he didn't cooperate. And yes, on the surface, that kind of protectiveness sounds admirable. A stepfather, a bonus parent, who claims there are no stepchildren in his home, only children. No steps except the ones leading up and down the stairs. But beneath the slogan, the hypocrisy shows. You don't need a legal contract to love a child. You don't need adoption papers to protect someone under your roof. Conversely, you can have all the papers in the world and still not show up. Kody, who thundered about fighting for Robyn's kids, is now sporadic with his own. Absent with Truly, his support inconsistent. If legal contracts are the measure, then by his own logic David should be able to adopt Truly. Everyone knows how outrageous that would be. And then there's the groundwork Kody lays in the background. Always the same tactic, always the same sleight of hand. Even when his fingerprints are all over a decision, he finds a way to frame the fallout as someone else's fault. He begins to paint Meri as the one whose attitude changed, whose behavior created the distance. He suggests she started rejecting him, covering herself up, hiding. He's offended that she guarded her body when he walked in unannounced. But think about the situation. If you're no longer a husband in the intimate sense, if you're neglecting your wife, why would you expect her to expose herself to you? Meri's instinct to protect herself wasn't disrespect. It was dignity. And Kody, crossing her thresholds uninvited, treating her home as if it were still his domain, was boundary breaking. In a culture where modesty is valued, where intimacy is supposed to mean something, his behavior is an intrusion disguised as familiarity. Yet he flips it, turning her caution into proof of her rejection, turning her withdrawal into the cause of his neglect. He creates the wound and then blames her for the scar. This is the pattern that ties everything together. Robyn planting suggestions under the guise of selflessness. Kody triangulating the wives, telling each one the other is the problem. Together recasting Meri's sacrifice as her idea and her downfall as her fault. By the time Meri is vulnerable enough to be catfished, the stage is already set. Kody can point to it as betrayal, ignoring the way his neglect made her susceptible in the first place. He attacks the very trait she prides herself on, her loyalty, because he knows that's where it will hurt the most. And beneath it all is Kody's insecurity over Robyn. He has admitted publicly that men have been chasing her, wanting her, trying to take her from him. That's why, for all the talk of destiny and spiritual unions, he wanted her locked down legally. A spiritual claim could be dissolved. A legal claim meant she was his. And for Robyn, that legal marriage gave her security, status, and the leverage to grow her family and her influence. She could even use the promise of more children as a bargaining chip, implying she couldn't expand the family until she had the title of legal wife. It's a tactic we've seen her use before, holding motherhood out as a condition for concessions. In the end, the whole saga stops looking like a tragic love story and starts looking like a power play disguised as a family drama. Each move, the adoption, the legal marriage, the shifting blame, fits into a strategy where Robyn gains elevation and Kody gains control. And Meri, who once held the strongest position, is left not only without her title but branded as the architect of her own undoing. This is the part that twists the knife. Robyn wanted to usurp Meri's role to secure her own place. Kody wanted to legally anchor Robyn to himself, both out of jealousy and out of the need for leverage. And together they built a narrative where every self-serving act was framed as sacrifice, every calculated move as coincidence, every gain as a burden they never wanted. It's the perfect con. Not just taking something from someone but making them believe they gave it away freely.